Okay, the topic of communion. So, we'll try and figure out what's tradition, and what are the commandments of man, and what are the commandments of God or Jesus. And so, if you think about it, let's see what happened. There are some people who, how often should we have communion? Should it be wine or grape juice? What about the foot washing? I'll try and touch on all those briefly here. So, one important thing is to examine yourself and to make sure you are worthy to take part in this ceremony. And there's no specific commandment on how often you do it. So, it's not like back in the Torah where the creators told us how often to do certain things. This one's kind of a wide open, and then Paul reinforces that thought later when he said, when you do this, or Jesus said it, as often as ye do. So there's no specific set timing for this, but just apparently as often as you do, you're commemorating the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so how often you do it, that's not, there's no specific commandment about that. But Paul does give a warning that, don't take it lightly. So, I mean, if you're having some struggles in life, or you're like unclean or unworthy, or just like something's going on in life where your heart isn't ready and your mind's in the wrong place, and you show up and like you didn't realize communion was going to be happening or something, I mean, I definitely think twice about participating, and make sure you are worthy and like your heart is in the right place and your mind is in the right place to take part in this, because it's a very important commemoration. And Paul said the reason why there are many sick people among you, like sick and even dying, I think, people among you, is because you're not partaking of this worthily. So that's an important point. As far as wine goes, I went back and forth on this a lot, and I might have in my food, what to eat video, what do you drink, I might have a little breakout on wine, but I don't know if I'm gonna forbid or promote one or the other specifically, but I will say that it is an assumption that for people to say that Jesus drank wine, because if you read all the accounts, it never did say wine. It said grape juice and fruit of the vine and all this stuff, and so it really could go either way. I just heard, I started my whole life not really caring, and then I came to a group where they're like, no way, it wasn't wine, and so I didn't think it was wine, and then I heard, oh, it was wine, and then I heard, no, it wasn't wine, and so I'm just going to encourage you to look into it. Because one interesting thing that I noticed is, because people give you the example of like Titus or someone who said, hey, have a little wine for your upset stomach or whatever. But there are two things with that. Like around that time period, if you Google it, there was actually a thought that like grape juice would help to settle like stomach pains. Grape juice, not fermented wine. And also, when you look up the word that was used for wine in the Strong's Concordance, the original Greek word in the New Testament when wine was used, you'll see the translators weren't even sure which one it was, whether it was wine or whether it was grape juice. And you'll gather that by reading what the Strong's people said about it. But like in the Old Testament, it's kind of clear. Like it talks about these different things. It talks about filthy lucre. It talks about, I think it even says beer at one point, like David followed the beer at the death of somebody. And it talks about grape juice, and but the last point I'm going to make about it is there does seem to be a pattern that the priests or the Nazarites were not supposed to drink it. And this was like the holy men weren't supposed to drink it, but it might be able to be drinking by other people, especially, I don't know, at like the feast or something. I'm not sure. But my conviction that I've come to in my heart is if the priests, and somewhere in Jeremiah there's an example of like it was maybe it was Jeremiah who came to the sons of the prophets and was like, here, drink this, and they were like, no, we will not drink it because we have not drink it, we are commanded by our fathers not to drink it, or something, and so it would be well with us. And so either the priests or the Nazarites weren't supposed to drink it, and that was apparently a good thing. And so for me, it's never really done anything for me one way or the other, alcohol. And so I'm thinking if it was good enough for the Levites, the priests, and the Nazarites, and this was like the cleanest, purest way, pleasing way to live life, I mean, that's what I'm going to abide by for now until Jesus comes and tell me otherwise. But, you know, it is kind of an interesting thing. It could be potentially a really big deal. Like, if you think about it, for communion, like, you're literally comparing the blood of Christ to fermented alcohol, of which nothing good comes. Like, it steals your mind. It does make, you know, there's just something that doesn't seem right about that. You know, I mean, like, you let a thief into your mind, basically, and you just make bad decisions when you drink. And, I mean, and who's gonna say where the limit is? It's different for all kinds of different people, but, like, seriously, that's something to really pray about. Like, I'd almost, like, fear and tremble very carefully, because you're comparing the blood of Christ to this potentially, very corruptive thing. And so anyway, assumptions aside, and just I'm not gonna I've said my piece on that. So the last thing I'm going to discuss is the foot washing. And some churches like to really jump on this one as if it was some commandment that's being forsaken by everyone, and like, we need to do this is part of the commandments. And I'm going to just say that I think that Jesus was setting an example, like, of something that was very practical in that day. Like, basically, the master is not greater than the servant, or is not greater than the master, or whatever. The master is not greater than the servant, and be humble. Some different denominations call it the ordinance of humility, but basically to be a servant and to serve and help one another. I mean, when he was doing it to the disciples, he asked them, do you know what I'm doing to you? Well, obviously he was washing their feet, but he meant by saying that there's something deeper going on here. And also, like, if you think about it, like I said at the beginning of this video, there was no set time for communion or foot washing to be done. So theoretically, you could do it often, or you could do it maybe even once in your life. I don't know. But, like, you know, to insist that people have to do this, I don't know if that is right. First of all, because, like, the foot washing specifically, because it could have just been a practical example, just like many of the other parables and things that Jesus used throughout his ministry. But also just the fact that communion, there's no set specific time for communion to occur on. So it's borderline. If people are insisting on other people doing it, it's kind of a little... it might be some confusion there, and it might even be traditions and commandments of men, kind of like all the other Pharisaical laws, like the washing of pots and cups, and they desire to glory over you by having you do this thing with them. So I don't know if I'd forbid anyone to do the foot washing, but I don't know if I'd necessarily go and say, hey guys, you got to do foot washing either. So I just kind of presented those points for you to think about and pray about. And, like, I mean, I guess I don't have a problem washing people's feet, but like I said, you know, I don't know if I necessarily feel convicted enough from what I read in the Bible to go out and say, hey, you're going to burn and miss out on eternity if you don't do this. So just pray about it, and that's all I'm going to say about this topic.